Good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a great Monday. This is Mindful Monday. We're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to coach you through inconsistent parenting and not following through, and how you can become a little more mindful about those. I will say those two things, being inconsistent and not following through, and they're two different things. We're going to talk about that, are two of the biggest things that are holding us back from being able to have our parenting dreams come true. A lot of times, our own inconsistency and our own inability to follow through is what gives us our biggest hurdles with parenting. So we're going to talk about if you have trouble with being inconsistent, or you have trouble with following through when you're doing parenting or disciplining. We're going to talk about that and what message that sends to your child. So very often, in the moment when we're inconsistent or we are not following through, we're doing some kind of escaping. We're not facing the issue head on, but the message that sends for our kids is pretty deep. So we need to make sure when we're parenting that we are giving the right message to our kids so that we are all on the same page. So let's start with inconsistent parenting first. So if you feel like your parenting is not consistent, meaning that your kids might get a different answer on a different day depending when they ask you. When I coach, I often address this, like bedtimes. Do you have consistent bedtimes for your kids, or do you have consistent practice for going to bed? And especially in the summertime, sometimes it's no, we don't have a consistent bedtime, which is fine. If you're also okay with a non-consistent answer from your kids when it's time to go to bed, if you're willing to deal with the fact that they may be you want them to go to bed early one night and then the next night they get to stay up, that's fine. But oftentimes as parents, we have the same expectation for what we want to happen outcome, but then our parenting is not consistent with that. So when we don't have consistency in our parenting, we're telling our kids that is whatever we're trying to parent that moment, whether it be bedtime, that is not important to us. So when we're inconsistent, we tell our kids that particular thing that we're parenting them on is not that important to us. Because if it was that important to us, we would be doing it often and on regular, and we'd have a routine and following through. If we don't have that consistency, then we tell our kids, hey, it's not as important to us. It's kind of like if you were going to see a personal trainer at the gym and you had a set time to meet at 9 a.m. every single week. And for 3 weeks in a row, you said, oh, well, I can't make it here at this time. I can't make it here at this time. You try and reschedule, but you can't really do it. You're kind of inconsistent with when you're working out. Your trainer is going to think, well, working out is just not that important to that person in that moment. And that's the same message we are sending to our kids as well. So if we want to have a consistent message to our kids, we have to be consistent ourselves, because what happens is our kids get the message, oh, it's not that important to them, and then they don't take it as important. And then the next time that behavior rolls around, we think, oh my gosh, we want you to do A, B, C, and we're going to be consistent this time, but the previous times we were inconsistent, and it's not that big of a deal. Your kid doesn't take it that seriously because it wasn't serious to you the previous times. So when we're inconsistent in our parenting, we send the message that we don't care a whole bunch about what we are trying to parent if we do not follow through. So this is for circumstances where you may have parented and had to give a consequence for an action. But then when the consequence rolls around and you have to enforce the consequence, you may not follow through. This is, and I really want you to hear this, this is important, because when we don't follow through on something that became a consequence and was important to us, that we needed to have a teachable moment with our kids, when we don't follow through, we send the message that we don't care enough about the child. That is difficult for a child to deal with. When a child has a behavior in action, we give a consequence, and then we don't follow through. We're teaching the child that they weren't worth that follow through. And that can really stick with that child. And at first, I'm sure if there's no follow through and the kid got off the hook, it's an immediate, kind of like, oh, I got away with it, which is a whole nother issue that will reinforce itself. But in the moment when we don't follow through with our parenting, that is when we send that message to our kids that they're not important enough or they're not worth that follow through. So really making sure, my Mindful Monday tip for the day is, if you have to give a consequence or you have to follow through after a child does an action, before you just dole out whatever is emotionally riding on you right there, because it's so easy in those moments to be connected with the emotion of anger or frustration or disappointment, and to give a consequence from that area, but it's not something that is going to be something that you can follow through with. For Mindful Monday, if we can take a step back, take a couple deep breaths, and really think about, how do I want to follow through to help this child learn the lesson? Instead of it just being a consequence, and I want to get that consequence because I'm angry, what does that child need to learn from the action that they just took? That something needs to be rectified, or something needs to be set straight, or a lesson needs to be learned. But what is that lesson, and how do I want to teach it? One of the great things when I coach parents that is amazing is, I always say, and this has helped me so much as a parent, if I am in one of those moments where I have a huge emotion surge because one of my children has done something and there is going to have to be a consequence for an action, but I'm coming at it from an emotional state. I'm not using my full prefrontal cortex to think through how I want to teach them the lesson. I am more reacting instead of responding. Then what I can choose to do is to actually say to that child, and this is a huge lesson for this kiddo, I can say to that child, I am frustrated, angry, disappointed, whatever the emotion is. I need to take a moment to calm down and think through how I want to handle the situation. That teaches your child to respond instead of react. So when you, as the parent, when they've done whatever, you know there has to be a consequence, and you know you're going to have to follow through on that consequence, give yourself that moment of grace. Give yourself that 1 minute of breathing, or give yourself that step back, and just, it can be 10 seconds, but give yourself time to step back, detach from that emotional reaction you want to have, and take a mindful moment to say, what does this child need to learn in this moment? And don't hand out consequences that you're not going to follow through on, because we don't want to send the message to our kids that they're not important, or that they're not important enough for us to follow through and that they're not important enough to learn the lesson that needs to be learned. And that's the important thing. So when we are inconsistent, we tell our kids that whatever that inconsistent thing was, that's not important to us. When we don't follow through with consequences with our kids, when we just sort of let it go to the wayside, or we dole out this big consequence when we're angry, but then we don't follow through with it, we teach our kids that they're not worth it. And they definitely are worth it. We just have to maybe be a little more mindful about what we are capable of following through on, and what the lesson our kids need to learn on is. So to help with inconsistent parenting, if you have trouble with inconsistency, I say pick one thing that you would like to find more consistency in. And the way to find the thing is think about what really annoys you or sends you over the edge. When we go back to bedtime, when I talked about in the beginning, after 8:00 p.m., I become a less happy parent because I'm tired and I want to go to bed. So for me, consistency in bedtime is important. And my children get the benefit of me getting them into bed before that 8:00 time. They get the best mom. So they don't have an inconsistent mom who is feeding off of her tiredness and her emotions. So pick something that drives you nuts, or makes you, or is a time when you know that you are quick to get angry. That's maybe something that, whatever that is, that's where you need to be more consistent. And then as far as follow through, making sure when we're following through, we are just being mindful. Take that moment if you need to take that moment, and come up with a plan that teaches our kids instead of punishing our kids. All right, you guys, have a great Mindful Monday.